So what? When we say opening? So with Hawaii set to reopen on September 1st, maybe, there's still a lot of uncertainty in the community on what will be happening. Hawaii continues to see a rise in community spread, and that's with tourism numbers so low. The addition of thousands of tourists coming in just complicates things. There are just so many details to go over, such as, hey, when school stay opening? You sure? Because last time you wouldn't change your mind. I forget my father for watch my kid for the kind of distance learning. And you mean for tell me, I no can sit on the beach with my friends under the tent and holo holo. You ever try sit on one beach in the sun with no shade and wearing one mask? Bruh, the bugger is hot. And no more UH volleyball and high school sports. What we going to watch? That's it. I canceled Spectrum already. Waste money. And while it's easy to just sit around and complain, I thought about how I would reopen Hawaii safely if it were up to me. I really want to address the two biggest issues I think facing the state: the 14-day quarantine enforcement and the testing policies for letting people in. Before I get into my suggestions, I just want to state that Hawaii's government officials have had to make some really tough decisions, and I don't envy their position at all. I know that they're working really hard, and I just want to thank them for their service, and they probably don't hear that much nowadays. You know, it's so easy to complain and criticize. You know, I read the comments on the Honolulu Star Advertiser, I know, but criticism doesn't do much without solutions, and maybe my solutions aren't feasible, but I wanted to offer at least something constructive rather than just. So these quarantine policies are only as good as we enforce them, and let's face it, it's hard for the government to enforce this alone, so we need to call on the help of the community. And yes, there are vigilante Facebook groups trying to catch visitors breaking quarantine, but the scale is just not really there. So instead, I would introduce what I can only call the Hana Ukulele Peanut Butter Jelly Mama Kiss the Baby program. And if you grew up in Hawaii, you know exactly what that means. The new program would allow any person to take and submit a photo through the state's current tracking app of anyone that they identify who is breaking quarantine. State officials would then follow up on that individual, and if it's found that the individual did break quarantine and is then fined, the person who took the photo would receive a nominal reward. I'm thinking Zippy's chili tickets or a Jamba Juice BOGO card, but we'll see. Now, the state already has an app to help track visitors, which of course is still voluntary to download, and that's fine. You can't force people to download an app. However, we should update the app to allow people to submit their photos to state officials, which would allow the community to better participate in helping keep Hawaii safe. And know that this wouldn't be a singling out of only tourists caught violating quarantine orders. I think that's a misconception. It would also apply to residents who are also breaking quarantine as well. But how can we tell who is breaking quarantine and who isn't? Because no, not all Caucasian people are tourists. I know it's hard to believe, but it's true. So effective immediately, all visitors and residents who are subject to quarantine will have wristbands, one for each wrist. And these wristbands will be used to identify them if they go out in public and can only be removed by a state agency official at the end of the 14-day quarantine. The wristbands will be brightly colored and waterproof like the kind you see at a water park, and will be individually numbered to correspond to each visitor. Any tampering of the wristbands would constitute a violation, which in this case would be a $5,000 fine. Because I'm thinking if the lifeguards at Aulani Resort can enforce their wristband rule for the pools and lazy river, I'm pretty sure it'll work for the state. Of course, all businesses would be asked to check both wrists before serving anyone. And yes, some people may be wearing long sleeve clothing, although I don't know why you would. I mean, it's so hot outside. So as a business, just please politely ask to check their wrists before providing any service. And any businesses that serve a person with the wristbands would be subject to the fine as well, but are also eligible for the nominal reward leading to an arrest. Now, with this increase in visitors expected to come in September, the state would need to hire more investigators to follow up on quarantine cases. Two types of investigators I think would be needed: in-office and field agents. In-office work would include checking up on individuals subject to the quarantine. These agents should be familiar with searching on social media sites for any questionable activity under such hashtags as hashtag Hawaii, hashtag my Hawaii vacation, and hashtag breaking quarantine 808, if that actually exists. And the field agent should be prepared to blend in with tourists at popular attractions, such as beaches, hikes, and bars, and discreetly inquire where people are from and how long they have been in Hawaii. And since a lot of young people who would normally be working in retail or hotel jobs are out of work, I think this would be a pretty good opportunity for them to use those thousands of hours of social media experience for some good use. All right, now to address the pre-testing policy. Probably the most asked thing people want to know is about the pre-testing policy. If you aren't aware, currently anyone who arrives in Hawaii, whether a visitor or resident, is subject to a 14-day mandatory quarantine. A violation of the quarantine will result in up to a year in jail or a $5,000 fine. Starting September 1st, the current plan is to allow arrivals to bypass the 14-day quarantine requirement if they provide a negative test within 72 hours of their flight. Well, that's the old plan. I would just toss it out. Instead, starting September 1st, I think there should be no pre-testing option. Instead, all residents and visitors over the age of 10 would be subject to testing upon arrival, including the wristband requirement, and they must quarantine until the results get back. And anyone who chooses not to get tested, that's fine, but they'd be automatically subject to the 14-day quarantine requirement. And see, the reason for this change is that it makes no sense to me to allow some people to take a test and others not to when they're on the same plane in a confined space for hours. So for example, let's say Kimo wants to come back home from the mainland, and so he takes a test and it comes back negative and he boards the plane. That's all fine. Then Manu decides to not take the test and sits near Kimo. If Manu is positive and infects Kimo on the flight, we just allowed 2 infected people on the plane, and the negative test from Kimo becomes irrelevant, and he just wasted $150 for his test. So rather than stressing people out as they try to get tested before their flights, no tests before a flight is necessary. Just take the test when you get here. Now, people should expect to get their test results within 3 to 7 days, and we have to be able to guarantee that we can get the test results back in that time frame. I know that we locals live by the mantra, if can, if no can, no can. But in this case, we have to. We have to guarantee to get the results back to people in that time frame, because I think it's pretty reasonable for people to quarantine for a few days as they wait, but we have to promise that we can get them the results when we say we're going to do it. And to address this increase in testing, the state has to invest more in our own testing capabilities. So we'd have to procure the equipment and then get to work. And that would be my plan. Now, obviously, there are way more things to consider when it comes to opening the state of Hawaii, but I think I'd start there and then see what happens. We really don't know what's gonna happen, and that's put a lot of people on edge. You know, businesses are stuck waiting, which means employees are stuck as well. And I just hope that we have a solid, well-communicated plan moving forward. So thanks for watching, and aloha.